Life is magic!
Thank you.
Yes!
All right, boss.
Oh, he's done it!
Cold specialist. Anything that is to do with extreme temperatures, he seems to do it.
I developed a method which is relatively easy to adopt, to learn. And it's about, what I learned in hard nature.
So you become the alchemist of your own chemistry. Let's do this. Just breathe in. And let it go.
Very accessible and powerful to the human understanding. And it is all scientifically endorsed.
Guess what? We found the proof to tap into our body and mind, enabling us to become happy, strong, and healthy.
I'm going to change the world.
Let's see what's actually going on here. Jumping into icy water will attract attention. So will swimming underneath ice. So will encasing yourself in ice and starting a stopwatch, especially if you set up a camera and call the media beforehand.
It may well be a winter's day in the Arctic Circle.
And action, Wim, on your own timing.
Why? Because to most people, it doesn't sound like a very good idea. Stunts have always generated interest. Interest can be easily converted into fame and then money. I'm going to draw a line between evidence and supposition, point out rather cynical, intentional conflations, and channel key insights from a top cold immersion specialist researcher, free from the distractions of marketing or entertainment industries. As for those people brazenly dropping nuggets of science into a stew of half-truths, obfuscation and exhibitionism, will raise the alarm. Because without clarity, people will get hurt. Many already have, some have died, aping the actions of showmen who won't take responsibility for where good ideas end and pseudoscience begins. I will focus on the so-called Iceman, Wim Hof. He's not alone in this particular category.
Hey, Lisa, let's have a look. Come here. You gotta show those. 3, 2, 1, let's go! Okay, cogs running!
Although in and out of the limelight over the decades, Hof's most recently been a centre of attention here, something he appears not to mind.
Feel a little bit stiff today.
On a BBC reality series, one of those celebrity challenge ones. These rarely bring out the best in anyone, so we need to look at the whole ecosystem around the Wim Hof business for context. Anonymous TV producers must not become scapegoats for claims made by the man himself.
As soon as the celebrities jump into the icy water, they will awaken to the deepest part of their brain.
Hof rose to prominence with personal feats of cold endurance, racking up all manner of world records. Not all succeeded at the first attempt, and many have since been substantially exceeded by record seekers with less eyebrow-raising philosophies, but they did happen and were authenticated. We're not talking about a magician or a full-bore charlatan. The story would have been simpler had that been the case, but even from these early days, oddities crop up, to be lapped up by media, with details reported at face value. I've seen this sensational drama trotted out in most Wim Hof interviews.
At 35 meters, I lost sight because the retina, it froze. I couldn't see nothing.
And it got a blur, I didn't see anything anymore. And I missed the 50-meter hole, I went that way.
Oh my gosh.
And the thing is, I never had agony of drowning. I was in control.
That his retinas froze when swimming under ice, on an attempt when he needed rescuing by safety divers. I certainly understand that vision might be impaired under lake ice when someone is running low on oxygen and otherwise disorientated. But unfrozen freshwater doesn't get much below 0 Celsius, and whilst it conducts heat faster than air, will never approach low temperatures possible above the ice. Retinas sit at the rear of your eye with an excellent, warm blood supply. Even accounting for an innocent translation error, so even if he actually means his corneas, the front of his eyes, the idea of actually freezing the eye cells without lasting damage, or forming an ice film over them underwater, is implausible. This is careless at best for someone allying himself to science and the integrity it demands. By the way, there is some precedent for corneal tissue freezing when exposed to extremely low temperatures in high winds, like in high altitude skydives, but this is rarely the sort of injury that clears up 5 minutes later. I found this claim repeated and published verbatim countless times without challenge. It reminds me of a cold weather expeditioner who I otherwise respect a great deal, but whose unswerving claim that his knees actually froze makes me cringe. Even in temperatures around -50, the fluid in our knees, being exercised and safely inside a pair of windproof trousers, don't freeze. Stiff, tired and creaky, sure, but for the fluid to freeze, the tissue around it would have to as well. And I've never heard of a localised frostbite of the knee for someone otherwise alive and functioning. Anyhow, back to Mr. Hof. Realising this occasional news coverage and personal feats are hard to scale as a business, he, and later with family, formalised the 3-part approach into the very official sounding Wim Hof Method: breathing exercises, cold exposure and meditation. So far, nothing wildly amiss, but neatly packaged and marketed, and fully embracing the Iceman moniker, he could sell the concept via speaking, books, residential courses, and later a branded training and therapy offering he himself need not be present at. Good business for sure.
Very capable of influencing into our energy management on cell level. Very capable to get in our DNA. Very capable, thus, to intervene and direct our happiness, strength and health.
Alongside and critical to this particular marketing drive is science. To avoid being written off as a sham or just another Westerner selling their own flavour of Eastern-inspired, mystical, guru-esque mental and bodily wellness, Hof accepted invitations by physiology and medical researchers to be studied. He states that this scientific rigour sets him apart. And with such a unique selling point, of course, comes serious responsibility. Presumably, motivations on the other side of the table varied.
That the scientists became curious, hey, what this man is doing is not possible physiologically.
I'm sure a few of the scientists ached to call scam on the whole thing, others to be the one to make the great discovery, validating Hof's claims but in less frilly, vague language. My first observation is that studying one person, even in a pool of quote-unquote normal people, is going to produce data of limited value. Likewise, a small group of Wim Hof disciples. Repeatability, a large N number, and good controls is what garners respect from peers.
Creates for him a possibility to control his vessels, control his blood vessels. What we see is that he can separate his core very well from his shell. So this could be an explanation.
But if they could get a sense of what's been going on, placebo driving unusual performance, a genetic anomaly, and so more of a curiosity, or a revolutionary method that can be prescribed to a wider population, then at least a subsequent, more useful experiment can be devised. My own undergraduate biological studies concluded some time ago. Physiology wasn't really my focus, and so although I can fluently devour background reading, I thought I'd enlist the experience and advice of a specialist. Professor Mike Tipton is one of the big names globally when it comes to human physiology in extreme conditions, and particularly regarding cold and water immersion. For this discussion, he is my authority for what's cutting edge, what is settled consensus, and to point out areas where question marks remain. Important to say this now, what I've not done is ask him to knock about the reputations of famous names and their various claims. That's on my head. Before sitting down with Professor Tipton, I had a tour of the university research facilities and of course an obligatory dunk. In fact, a few years ago, a teammate and I were generously given access to their cold chamber to check the fit and design of our Arctic smocks. Anyhow, a quick rewind is needed. Through the long bulk of our long history, humans did not evolve to thrive in cold conditions, let alone prolonged immersion in very cold water or in direct contact with ice. But we started off without centrally heated homes that guarantee us day-long comfort. Over time, we as a species, alongside other hominid species, had to deal with migration into colder parts of the world. With ice ages and mini-ice ages to add into the mix, we needed a strategy. This pressure to survive led humans down a different evolutionary path compared to how other primates and mammals avoid freezing to death.
The thing that enabled humans to move from their, southeastern African origins was intellect. And so what I think humans tended to do was move away as they could control the environment with fires, caves, furs, and so that pressure to adapt over generations was probably weaker than it was in other animals that developed blubber and fur and all the various biochemical alterations, to the point where even today, if you look at people across the planet, in pretty much any situation, if you look at the Inuit, office workers in London, office workers in New York, and if they report being thermally comfortable, I guarantee their mean skin temperature will be within 0.2 or 3 of 33 degrees Celsius.
Our approach wasn't evolving a seal-like blubber layer or a dense coat of fur, but instead of using our heads, making warm clothes, controlling and enjoying the warmth of fire, and by building insulated and heated shelters. Large, clever brains demand lots of energy, so storing it as white fat for later use gave us an advantage and hastened our tendency to think our way to avoiding an icy demise rather than relying on blunt physiological tactics in isolation. Our evolutionary journey eventually sidelined the creation and utilization at scale of beige and brown fat, the varieties that can be used to literally generate heat without the body having to shiver, exercise, or put on a warm coat. It contains densely packed mitochondria, and good blood supplies mean that warmed blood can be exported around the body. Babies have a fair amount of this sort of fat. Their brains, behaviour, muscles, and nervous system aren't ready yet, and they need the help. Humans have more white fat than many other mammals, but by adulthood, far less brown fat. The remnants that we have left can be activated, and the amount that we have of it varies. This recruitable brown fat is integral to our discussion, and that brings us more or less up to date. The legacy of our evolutionary history and the obvious fact that not all humans are the same can be seen across groups of people especially suited for the difficult environments that they find themselves born into. Some are genetic adaptations and will be passed from parents to children.
Now, as you say, there's some evidence that when you look at people from high altitude, when you look at people from hot climates, cold climates, you can see morphological anthropometric adaptations, but it's what's happening with the physiology, whether anything is being passed on.
And others are more habituations made by body and mind within a single lifetime and can't be inherited.
All their behaviours are adapted, yes, but also probably right down to the cellular level, they've got better thermal tolerance. When the armour started to wear shorty wetsuits, they lost some of their peripheral adaptations to cold, even though the periphery was still at pretty much the same temperature, but their core temperatures weren't falling as much.
The latter variety are interesting because we might be able to understand and harness new capabilities for anyone who seeks them. The former, that human subgroupings evolved in different parts of the world are better attuned to the cold, the heat, the water, thinner air, and so on, are more an observation. You can't do much with that unless you decided to selectively breed human beings. I think we needed that as a basis, but we return to the matter in hand. So it's an unusual person that not only seeks out the cold, and for that I do need to declare an interest, of course, but those who actually seek it out, willfully casting aside the thousands of years of intelligent tricks we've accrued to make the cold a little bit less awful than it need be. There's a difference between working in cold places as comfortably as possible and actively trying to get cold. This is a long-term trend in how we have civilized ourselves, and perhaps we should be careful what we wish for. This particular television series involves celebrity challenges, and of course the obligatory personal journeys and emotional revelations that they use to compete with each other, maximising their share of screen time. All these freezing escapades attract admiration, derision, gawping, and imitation. All are forms of attention, and so this strange activity draws in the attention seekers, both for the celebrity contestants and whimsical hosts, but of course for the centre of attention himself.
I created a method. It is about breathing, cold exposure, and the mindset.
But to be found amongst the less egregious periphery of humans, innocent outliers, one-offs, people capable of unthinkable feats, are there some genuine benefits or discoveries to be made about our bodies, including, of course, our minds?
There is people who've advocated going into water for centuries as a beneficial therapy. Places around the British coastline exist because of that. Brighton, for example, where people came from London to take to the waters. Hippocrates, Thomas Jefferson, Florence Nightingale, all these Darwin, all these people advocated immersion.
We must delineate what may be useful from what is being dangerously peddled to the masses through ignorance, cynical commercial manipulation, or both. If we also want to make space for a moment of escapism or voyeuristic entertainment, there's a case to be made for that, but it mustn't be conflated with serious advice advocated to the general public.
People who do regular cold bathing or showers, cold showers, the heart rate goes down with 20 to 30 beats a minute, 24 hours a day.
Wow.
That means no stress, high levels of energy.
Okay, well, we all want to be like you, Wim. You're amazing. You've created an app where people can learn about your method and take online classes.
Through traditional television, that's now chiefly made way for online platforms in countless formats and guises, we've seen booming fads, increasing in tempo as ease of communication widens and deepens. Some are plain moronic, some harmless fun, others may be more sinister. Most disappear as the next one arrives, but some stick around longer, perhaps because they've always been there really and enjoy a resurgence as something or someone brings renewed attention to them. Outdoor swimming is a relatively uncontroversial example. But then we have all these sorts of things.
Well, it's really simple, Tricia. Kids are pouring salt on their hands or forearms, then seeing who can hold an ice cube on it the longest.
In most cases, there's a factor of look at me, despite a veneer of bringing awareness to worthy causes perhaps. Beneath all that noise, our grounding must begin with settled facts. They have earned consensus amongst impartial researchers who deserve our attention. From that basis we can explore, investigate and probe with an open mind. All good scientists have an open yet questioning mind. But hear this. Beware those who accuse you of a closed mind purely because you call out tactics of shaky logic or who smuggle through nonsense alongside a few distracting truths.
Because it trains all the muscles in the veins.
Fully and we become alkaline. More oxygen is getting in toward all cells. Then the alkalinity makes the chemistry right in our body.
It's vital to point out where benefit of the doubt ends and restraint must begin, because what lays beyond does not deserve our respect, our attention, or our money. I've already said, I'm a specialist in travel across cold parts of the world, and I make a living partly from the way I communicate about them, so I have a dog in this fight. I've also jumped into cold water a few times, but for two very specific reasons. The first, so I have the experience indelibly inked into my memory, so if I ever have an accident, it won't be my first time. So no longer with the handicap of a mental unknown. We'll come back to this tactic with the celebrity Wim Hof TV show. The second purpose, to illustrate the brutal difference between cold immersion with and without a purpose-made dry suit. I went to lengths to extol the virtues of the latter, not the former. I was not hawking ad hoc extreme cold water immersion, nor creating a brand around it.
Are you ready?
Yes!
Ah!
But why do you have to do that?
No. Okay. Here you are. Motivated?
Yes!
We are?
Yes!
We will show the world how to become happy, strong, healthy.
From the word go, this was a disturbingly shallow spectacle, and the series that progressed in the same predictable, forced and excruciating vein. It's typical of Wim Hof's more recent brand and media performances, and especially over the last decade, as his business has matured and grown.
My name is Wim Hof, and I love the cold. I believe it can help people overcome their problems. Throughout the last 40 years, I've been doing things physiologists and doctors thought was impossible for a human to do. Yet, I was doing it. I'm not a superhero, a guru, or anything like that. My name is Wim Hof. I don't feel the cold. I feel its power.
You go into icy water, it all stops. Why? Because the blood flow needs to go into the deeper realms of the brain. And there is serenity, there's deep peace, there is power.
The cold healed me. And after this, all the fear and hate you got with the cold, it'll be gone. Whatever the problem is, mentally, physically, I found the keys to unlock it. They did research, and they saw the people doing this are activating twice as much adrenaline than a person who's going into its first bungee jump in fear. Wow. Imagine that spike. But you are able to respond to what your body is going to do through the power of your mind. I created a method. It is about breathing, cold exposure, and the mindset. Through the breathing, anybody is able to retrieve hidden, deep fears, grief, and emotion. The breathing is able to bring deep trauma to the surface. Let me explain. This breathing technique makes your body sensitive. You're gonna open up the body to go into the depth and retrieve trauma. You don't know what is gonna come up. What's gonna come up? First round, we will go 75 seconds without air in the lungs. And anybody can do it in the living room, on the sofa, in bed.
Alfie looks totally off his face.
He looks like
That's
shocked.
incredible.
No bullshit. The real thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wim.
And when we do this breathing, we get a deep connection with what is inside of us. And whatever is hidden in the depth, the emotion, is able to go. And that's why this, Gabby, it's great that it is you who get a breakthrough. A no-nonsense woman are able to go as deep, to have a emotion which is out of control, going to the surface and fly off like a bird. That is a breakthrough.
There we go.
The jury is still out with regard to ice baths. There, again, with a lot of these things, one can put forward a hypothesis, one can propose mechanisms and cascades and anti-inflammatory responses, and other proposed beneficial mechanistic effects. I think if you look across the piece, you'll find a mixed bag, and this is very much an ongoing issue, but you'll find a mixed bag of studies that support or ambivalent or contradict it. I think at the moment, the take-home message would be, if you're involved in a kind of event where there are repeated bouts within a day, something like a 7-a-side rugby tournament, for example, then they may have some benefit.
In the morning when you're nice and toasty, in bed, and then getting out into an ice bath, that is awakening and all. And wow.
I get more and more concerned as things get less and less controlled. So somebody, filling up an ice bath at home and leaping into it bothers me.
The best elite athletes, Olympians, the best MMA fighters, people who want to find always more than the ceiling where they are of their performance. They come to me. I tell them, I don't care how good you are. I make you better.
Yeah, these rumours go round that something's good for you, and almost for psychological reasons, people feel obliged to do it because otherwise they feel that they've not got some ergogenic aid that somebody else has got. And that, we've seen that with nose strips. I'm pretty sure that if you told an elite athlete that if they put a green spot on their cheek, they'd go faster, they would do it, and they might even go faster. But, if this is beneficial, and it's beneficial in a way that's more than placebo effect or anecdotal, what's the mechanism? And the reason as a scientist you want to know that, because if you know the mechanism, then it's possible to titrate that mechanism or that function and maybe provide it for people who can't go open water swimming, can't do cold showering.
Ah, my foot's in! I want to show the celebrities that their bodies are capable of doing so much more.
This is my worst nightmare.
4,
It's a beach in
6,
wherever we...
7.
Oh, it hurts.
Cold shower a day keeps the doctor away because you train your cardiovascular system to the best.
Oh, are we going to play the game? We're going to play the name game. Okay.
Stress goes down, energy goes up. Boom!
Limits.
As a precaution, you've each swallowed a thermometer pill, and the safety team will be monitoring your internal temperatures throughout the challenge.
Your body has to maintain a temperature of 37 degrees, otherwise you become dysfunctional. 2 degrees difference is hypothermic. 6 degrees is gone. If you are able to stay today's challenge and do it, you are capable to go anywhere in your own brain. That's why we do this.
Straight in. Oh my God, how does he do that?
There's a lot to take from this sequence, either a confected reenactment of the story of him getting lost under the ice years back, which conveniently gives him the unofficial claim over his long since beaten under-ice world record, or complete disregard for safety planning. Later we'll delve into the irresponsibility of being the show-off joker on one hand, and the wise guide on the other.
It's not come up.
Where is he?
Oh my God.
He's not going to try and go to there, is he?
Where's he gone? Where's he gone? Oh my God, he's going to the other
he's going to be the whole way.
No way.
Wim!
Oh my
God,
gosh,
Wim!
you've just terrified the whole crew. Wim, you were supposed to go to that one.
What?
You were supposed to go to that one, I think.
Oh shit!
Wim, you just scared the living daylights out of me.
What? He can't help himself, can he?
That's all right then! It was real. And this is real for every person in the world. We are able to go into the cold and with that get a control over the deepest part of our brain. And if we are able to go into the deepest part, where else can we not go?
Potential value is again and again repackaged for purposes of marketing and/or extrapolated to an extent that the evidence does not yet support.
We don't know yet. I just gave 3 explanations. We need to do more studies.
An extent to where it becomes cynical and risible. Increasingly, he takes on the same flavour of excruciatingly trite, positive mental attitude slogans we've long since become used to being bombarded with.
Let's do this!
Lots of hugging, cheering, shouting, and talk of taking a deep breath and controlling your mind, your future, and your life. This is not groundbreaking psychological therapy on display. Those people less easily bought by the veneer of televised world records and hand-woven Himalayan shawls have delved deeper, and over past decades some interesting observations have been made of Wim Hof. Here are a few.
And what we expect when he's staying in the ice like this for 1 hour, 1.5 hours, that his core body temperature drops. And we know when it drops 10 degrees, up to 27 degrees, a person dies. Well, that was the first big surprise. I show you the result here of the core body temperature. The blue shade is the area when he is 80 minutes in the ice, exactly like he's in the ice here in a few minutes. And what you see is that the core body temperature drops hardly. It goes from 37.7 to 37.4. So there's no isolation from an air layer. His shell is very, very cold, gets extremely cold, whereas his core stays warm. And that's very exceptional.
There's no serious evidence that Hof can specifically and consciously flick a switch in his specially enlightened mind and increase his targeted internal heating, despite appearance.
Physiological, we call this a mystery, and we need to do more research to really understand.
They have not applied sufficient controls to claim this, but it is accepted that his body contains a higher than normal percentage of brown fat tissue, that sort that can warm circulating blood without the body resorting to shivering or using behaviour, like seeking warmth or adding a layer of clothing. But so does his identical twin, who neglects to follow the Wim Hof Method. His brother's cold performance also turns out to be better than average. Setting aside other claims, if you combine this genetic aberration with someone employing mental training techniques to control panic or reactions to pain, plus practice, then apparently superhuman feats may be within your grasp. And, of course, a proportion of the world's population will likely be under that same thin tail of a graph, depicting those with lots of adult brown fat, as opposed to those with average or below average amounts.
Humans are remarkably variable for all kinds of different reasons. We've done studies over the years on breath hold time with people dressed in swimming trunks going into water at, let's say, 12 degrees Celsius. And you've got people where you can't even measure a breath hold time. And then you've got the sort of half man, half Weddell seal who seems to be able to hold their breath for nearly 2 minutes. But the nice thing about dealing with humans is you can then ask them about that and you can delve into why that is. And they say, oh, I can just hold my breath for a long time. I've got a really good ability to suppress the drive to breathe. Because of course your breath hold time is a combination of the afferent information trying to make you breathe and going in straight into the respiratory centres, causing you to try and breathe, and your ability to suppress that. And so you see that variation. I mean, or we will look at people deliberately who are cold acclimatized. And so I can put somebody like Lewis Pugh, who's been to this lab, who does all of the cold water swimming, and we can lower him into 10-degree water, and you can look at the trace of his ECG and his respiration. You can't see where he went in. He is so cold habituated.
I've worked with people who, as they term it, run hot, even in very cold conditions. They need to wear thinner clothes when hauling Arctic sledges around. And of course, we all know people who feel the cold badly, and not just because they are psychologically frail or haven't eaten enough or hydrated. Losing the genetic lottery like this can be mitigated against, certainly, but some people who want to perform in extremes of temperature might well be out of luck. Most people will never need to find out, of course. A recent study in mice shows that if you hijack glucose as a source of energy, something that activated brown fat does very intensively, then you can divert this life force from tumours. Without energy, they cannot grow and do their awful work. If cold therapy kickstarts this hijack without awful side effects, then you can understand the excitement behind the research. There's also a range of studies into using cold therapy in response to inflammation and possible infection. These did not necessarily need Wim Hof as a precursor, and plenty would have followed anyhow as logical progressions from other studies. This is far from settled, but there's potential. Large-scale controlled studies are planned. That's the critical word, potential, from observations of a very small group of test subjects.
A different way of breathing, which is able to make contact with the immune system and the nervous system to a very deep level.
This is a world away from proving that the Wim Hof Method categorically enables the body to fight infection, inflammation, and more serious illnesses. And there are two concerns. The first being that there's no certainty that it's always a good idea to cancel the body's decision to inflame.
The first thing you'd want to establish is whether or not you want to do that, or whether or not the increase in core temperature is itself an adaptive response.
Fever is there for a reason.
Is there for a reason, and that's been an age-old debate about even whether one gives drugs which will lower the deep body temperature, whether it's a process that goes through because it's part of the healing process.
Second, that people might be lulled into sidelining more conventional medical treatments and missing out on their benefits. As for the yoga, mind training, special breathing and so on, naturally this is hard to isolate and measure, and is poorly understood despite being integral to the practices of countless human cultures for centuries. It would be bizarre to dismiss all of this as nonsense. The misleading influence of placebo, itself not well understood, plus anecdotes and the immensely multivariate nature of mental training, our emotions, pain and so on, means that so much more study and restraint in what we assert as fact is surely obligatory. Those far better versed in meditation have pointed out the overlaps between various popular techniques and what Wim Hof has packaged within his method.
People ask me, what is the difference between Tumo and this method, and or is it the same? It's absolutely not the same.
do. It looks like it, because we both sit in a cold environment. But this method trains people in the West a whole lot faster to go into the cold and derive benefits from it.
Any subtle originality is argued for and magnified with shrewd, business-like poise. No one would want to think residential courses costing many thousands of pounds were in fact merely a crucible of cold showers that wake you up.
There you go!
Come on, Alfie, sing it out.
Widely accessible Himalayan-derived meditation, and some yoga. Specific techniques training adherents to control their urge to flinch or panic when uncomfortable and to desensitize to all things unpleasant through repetition might explain revelations attributed to other branches of the three-stage method. Don't underestimate the social urge also to prove a point.
Patrice, you're at 15 minutes. For safety reasons, we've got to get you out.
You have to pull me out.
Patrice, your body temperature is dropping and we're going to have to get you out.
No.
No, we have
so
to.
you have no choice.
No, I stay.
Get out!
Patrice, seriously, get
Gotta
out.
get out, Patrice, honestly.
No. No.
But it's dangerous, you've got to get out. You have to get out.
To garner rounds of applause from those around you, and the delayed prize of bragging afterwards. Discomfort can quickly become a small price to pay. When harnessed to the extreme, a swathe of ancient practices are of course of considerable power when maximising pain tolerance. After all, there's no other way to explain the calmness and dignity of these utterly heartbreaking public displays. Techniques honed over many years can be deployed to calmly endure pain that many of us can barely comprehend. Hof has latterly chosen locations across Europe and the US for his handful of camps and retreats, with other instructors too as the brand has grown. But for some time he was based in the Polish mountains, reportedly for cost saving and the easy access to the cold and the hills. How much cold varies. I'm not aware of him running camps in seriously cold regions of Scandinavia or northern Canada, and for that we should be thankful. But this leads on to something I noticed in the BBC series, and something any cold weather expert will tell you. The air temperatures that they depict are mild, and this makes a serious difference. The clothing and headgear and how participants act show that the air is actually above zero for the most part, perhaps with slightly colder spells in the evenings. This is extremely forgiving, but the production makes out that conditions are brutal.
Freezing.
Oh, I can't feel anything.
If you're working in the Arctic and you're unfortunate enough to go for a swim, you may be in the same near freezing water, but on emerging from that water must contend with minus 20, minus 30 or minus 40 degree air. There's no warm buzz of 5 degree air and radiant sunshine. Implying that temperatures and conditions are far more difficult and dangerous than reality isn't new for television, or an enterprise that relies on stories of the cold impressing audiences, but it relies on public ignorance.
This is for the absolute coldest that I get, about minus 60 when I'm going to be sitting on my sled eating my food stationary, and this will keep me warm and comfortable even in sort of the harshest conditions that Antarctica can throw at me.
The television people are as culpable as Hof on this count, and it's more a tangent of honesty than one that undermines the method itself. As a pointer though, here I am, skiing along with an unzipped top in northern Canada at air temperatures more than 20 degrees colder than depicted in most so-called extreme cold reality television series. I'm exercising, adjusted to the cold after a few weeks, and dressed well, but it still nulls the wow factor somewhat. People tend to bury this sort of footage, lest it damage the very bankable commodity of awe and wonder. Think of these courses with their so-called certified instructors and the guru himself, and compare them to the roundly hated pharmaceutical industry. The latter must put drugs and therapies through exceptionally rigorous testing and validation before being licensed and marketed. The Wim Hof Method, as a business, largely marks its own homework when it comes to training instructors. When they are being awarded their certification, they are being marked against the standards and medical beliefs set by the business, unilaterally and as far as I can see, aside from basic health and safety laws, without more stringent independent oversight.
There is a natural power in the cold.
Much of this Wim Hof series, and obviously the producers will have impacted this, has revolved around using the cold to feel better, more alert and more connected. Also with some pretty generic looking breathing and meditation. This is, I suspect intentionally, far more ambiguous and safe compared to Wim Hof's deeper claims about his proprietary method. The BBC have likely reined this in to protect ratings and to limit liability, no surprise there.
Wim, why does that happen? Is it just the shock?
Yes, her cardiovascular system is still adapted.
Is it coming back now?
Of course your senses will be heightened when exposed to the surprise and sensations of the cold. Combined with the nature of character-driven TV entertainment, the emotional levers and teary disclosures are hardly indicative of anything profoundly special being revealed. Back to Hof's individual feats. Other people have since far exceeded many of his world records without his methods. Many, in fact, with rather unsophisticated training regimes, practicing holding their breath underwater, straightforward, gradual cold water immersion. Little more is referred to in the interviews and analyses I read. The under-ice swimming record, without fins or wetsuit, has extended from Hof's near 60 metres to around 100 metres. Why are they not using his method? And why did they swim so much further? There have undeniably been more attempts by more people since the year 2000, but more competition. But that can't explain it all.
Running fastest half marathon barefoot, climbing Kilimanjaro in record time in shorts.
But those media-worthy one-offs were just the sparks to launch the rest. If you're going to encourage audience participation, it's imperative you are honest about moments when you, the expert and the guru, have repeatedly survived near misses with disaster. Aside from instances around the world of heart attacks and falling unconscious around water, all associated with but not proven to be due to the Wim Hof Method, his own brushes with disaster are skillfully spun into his legend. I've mentioned getting disorientated and drifting out of consciousness under the ice, but he also perforated his intestine during a stunt sitting directly on a park's fountain jet. You can fill in the how yourselves, but none of us can guess as to the why. One journalist who has become an unofficial on-off member of Hof's publicity team carefully tiptoed around the stupidity of this accident in one of his articles. Until investigating what happened and coming across a later video where the journo changed tack, the tone of the piece led me to believe that he was wounded doing something distinctly more courageous and sensible. One tenet of Wim Hof's legend is surely something akin to wisdom, or common sense at least. If your expert has nearly got himself killed through misadventure, this shifts the risk profile for those emulating him. It surely also calls the robustness of all else that follows and surrounds him into question. If you're essentially bottling enlightenment and wisdom and then selling it, this is troubling. There's of course some money to be made in being special, an anomaly. People though soon tire of a one-trick pony doing shock value look at me events. But what if you can shrewdly persuade everyone that they too can become special, or maybe just a better version of their previous self? That's where the money is. The market will buy more training courses, books, speeches, and endorsements if it's not merely around people gawking from their sofas at a bonkers bloke doing bonkers things. For that reason, I suspect commercial longevity will reward Hof more than it will someone like the soldier-turned-mountaineer Nims Purja. They share a number of self-promoting traits, but Purja isn't selling the dream that his audience can all attain his level. His business model, including guided trips, needs him and his inner circle to maintain a special status, and he reminds us of that on a daily basis. Famous people have a responsibility to their audience if they also wish to garner credibility and respect. Let's take another example. Psychologist Jordan Peterson and his daughter have, whilst eating a diet exclusively, without exception, comprised of meat, seen improvement in their severe autoimmune disease and associated problems.
Really just beef. Not, can you have like ketchup on it?
Nothing. Right. Yes, I wouldn't, it isn't something I would lightly recommend.
My diseases were put into complete remission by an all-meat diet. No plant food, so...
There's been inconsistency in how they present this deeply extreme carnivore diet to millions of followers.
You know, I am a clinical psychologist. I'm not recommending dietary alterations to my clients. I don't know enough about it, you know, and I'm testing things out and I'm watching Michaela, and she's been reading like mad. I mean, she must have read 300 papers on the relationship between diet and autoimmune disorders.
But the principle should be clear. Something is going on here. The sample size is tiny, and diet and disease are complex with many factors that are hard to control for. So it's fair to encourage further investigation. Maybe the Peterson clan could speed this up by funding studies transparently with some of the millions earned through a growing media empire. But I say this, do not yet advocate for others to do something this severe in desperate hope of a cure and in absence of a safety net.
My mission
why
is
do you do it?
to show that everybody by their mind can reach more depth within themselves and prevent. We got healing power.
We can, and perhaps we should, Steelman Wim Hof and his ilk for a moment. To begin with, Hof doesn't speak English as his first language, and so vocabulary and precision shouldn't be judged too harshly. Although that retina cornea thing really needs addressing. There's something to learn from almost everyone and almost everything, even with the grim caveat that instead of learning from someone's wisdom, they may instead represent a cautionary tale. The handful of studies derived from the ideas that Hof isn't necessarily the instigator of, but instead the figurehead and the test subject for, do show that there is something to investigate, but perhaps down a separate avenue to what's being sold. There's not nothing to see here, and that's clear. Perhaps Hof wants people to recognise that the normality of our modern urban existence has only been normal for a blink of an eye in terms of our history as human animals, and so there may be hidden or forgotten potential in our psychology and our physiology, varying in extent of course through the lottery of what genes you ended up with. Mike Tipton and others with similarly honed judgment would be unlikely to argue with that. This is where the steel man seizes up and begins to rust though. I thought of using a steel to straw metaphor, but I think you've all suffered enough. Even if we put evidence and research aside, there's space in our world for mystic gurus and entertainers, but they should not be selling medical adjacent therapies with little more than the endorsement of their circle of devotees and pet journalists. Even some lab studies need further scrutiny, as they all need funding, and true independence is not a given. Wim Hof-friendly scientists tend to be the same faces circling back round again and again in interviews.
Wim has figured out ways, namely through breath work and through exposure to cold, to take conscious control over aspects of his physiology that, for most people, they simply can't tune into and control. The science of what Wim Hof Method does is one of the primary interests of my lab now because it is so powerful and it's been shown to be powerful in the immune system, and we believe it will also hold some real potential for treatment of neurologic diseases.
One example, Andrew Huberman, has since launched both an enormous beard and a side business being a podcast guest. Coming back to journalists, there's consistency in a multitude of articles and shorter films where they encounter Hof for the first time, and the formula is near identical. They go on about how sceptical and rigorous a journalist they are, and apparently they're expecting to write a debunking exposé.
It's a rare moment in history when someone comes along who can perform real miracles with real evidence to back them up. We were skeptical, so Wim invited us to take a crash course in his method and see just how easy it is to become superhuman.
They're invited to do a course or a session entirely on Wim's terms, have a great time, find out that standing in the cold isn't so bad once you've tried it a few times, yet never consider explanations other than the method, for why they've come away feeling a buzz of positivity.
Dig in all kinds of scientific literature and readings and comparisons and statistics and all that. We don't need it. You are going to feel it. We are pioneers.
3, 2, 1, booty in! Yeah, booty out!
Really amazing. Who are you? Who are you?
Over here I was.
He walked up Mount Everest in his shorts. What have you done with your life? Yeah, because it is a bit nippy, really.
Yeah.
We came into this with a heavy dose of skepticism, but within a few days, we were able to comfortably climb a freezing cold mountain in nothing but our shorts.
Scott Carney is an investigative journalist. He came from America to this place to cut through the crap and the charlatan business and all that. And that was me, you know, the charlatan and the crap. It took him 2 days when he converted into, hey, but this shit is good. And he was standing with us in shorts after 2 days. And now he's, you know, he wants to write a book and bring it to America and everything.
I traveled to Poland to expose a charlatan,
a prophet who claimed he could give ordinary people superpowers. He said he could control his body temperature at will, hijack his immune system.
They end by delivering a rhetoric of how they are now a converted skeptic. It's almost like they've never heard of placebo, misdirection, dopamine hits, or the delight of a free holiday in the mountains.
There you jump.
This is fucking insane. What do we do? Dude, I've never jumped in cold water. Why are we doing a cliff jump?
6 meters up, freezing shallow water.
My concern, when I say I'm really worried about it, is when I find people, being provided with the opportunity to leap into cold water without any pre-screening, without any appropriate safety training, without any appropriate rescue and resuscitation equipment.
Just feel so alive, like all your primal instincts just kick in to save you. I could do this again.
A well-worn method to put critics off their stride is the weaponization of vagueness with interwoven emotional hooks. Critics naturally rile passionate supporters, and they quickly turn on a perceived heretic, especially if a narrative can be massaged to make said critic seem unkind or motivated by malevolence or jealousy. The comment sections and reply threads in social media, from YouTube to Reddit and all sorts, offer a concentrate of this sort of behaviour. Loyal flocks can brutally quell even a hint of rebellion with personal attacks, or more subtly, by undermining, repeating that a skeptic should try it, or failing that, try it again until the correct conclusion is reached. Rinse and repeat until subdued. Circular arguments and moving goalposts underpin the PR machine defences of many communities that champion belief over data, and it makes money from it. There's much out there already about cult behaviour and online mobbing, so I'll park that tangent there. A note on the BBC production itself. A famously bureaucratic broadcaster, most at ease when firmly residing in a lane of safe messaging. They cover their behinds, of course, with the written and spoken health and safety disclaimers, but the corporate legal team approved intentions become increasingly unclear as the series unrolls.
This is quite an important thing to say because everybody will be watching this at home thinking, oh my God, I want to try that, but this is incredibly dangerous.
Don't do it.
It's a classic phrase on television, but it's definitely don't try this at home. Divers under the ice.
Exactly. No one should try and replicate this at home and go and find a lake near them.
No, absolutely not.
So only in proper organised situations like this.
Yes.
Is this series advocating the Wim Hof Method? Explicitly, yes, despite focusing on certain aspects of it. Is it, at that same moment, chasing ratings and dramatic moments of jeopardy and pot-stirred sentimentality? Yes. Is it saying, and indeed warning, that what they are doing comes with significant risk? Yes. So, BBC, are we gawping at an entertainer seeing his ordeals come revelations inflicted on soundbite-hungry celebrities, or are we being introduced to something that may help the masses? There's no healthy tension generated between those two. The vagueness is either lazy or intentional.
Through this breathing technique, you are able to defy the worst of stresses, not being able to breathe. The world record distance was 50 meters. I did 113 meters.
By accident?
Yes, by accident. But then you see that you are capable of doing more than you think. I survived. First thing when I came out of the water was the realization while I took the breath, I had conquered the concept, the fear of death.
The activities are labelled as dangerous, yet Hof is allowed to advocate and broadcast increasingly bizarre proclamations as if they were authoritative. The presenters slide in an unconvincing minute-long segment addressing inevitable cynics, but there's zero substantial pushback.
That was incredible.
It's all real, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's going to be people, without a doubt, who are watching this at home who are going, oh, hang on a minute. They're not going to believe it because it's a stretch for some people to go, I'm not buying into this. What would you say to them?
Just try it once.
Yeah.
Is my distaste for Hof's offerings partly driven by a quintessential cultural aversion for OTT, bombastic delivery, and skepticism for hippie mysticism, especially when awkwardly intersected with science?
Stress goes down, energy goes up, and you feel, wow, shit, I feel good. Yeah!
Probably yes. I'm certainly no fan of people who think that shouting rehearsed sound bites like they recently graduated from the Royal College of Overacting makes them more believable. That's a matter of taste, and that specific point I recognise. But I contend that abusing our trust in the scientific method can be truly damaging. And in wrapping up, I must be precise. There's undoubtedly value in being reminded that because the human body has the capacity to adapt and habituate quite markedly within its own lifetime, and not just over a vast evolutionary time frame, exposing yourself to various stresses may help you deal with them better. Whether through knowing what to wear and how to behave, but also in letting your body take action to help itself through quote-unquote relearned ancient mechanisms. Most people in reasonable health can probably do this.
We don't know, in terms of the great mix that occurs when one goes open water swimming. You've got blue therapy, green therapy, you're immersed, you're exercising, you've got the hydrostatic squeeze of the water, psychologically you've overcome a challenge of going into the cold. There's so many factors that might contribute to a beneficial effect that without isolating each one of those and saying, well, it actually is the cold, in which case, how much cold? Do I need to get the whole body cold? Do I need to get a hand cold, a foot cold? Could we be doing this in a care home with just a cool glove?
If people want to create awareness, products, brands, and therapies to sell on that basis, so be it.
I don't think that industry is any different to any other, industry that takes, advantage of a potential commercial opportunity. So, that's just the way it's always been. From elixirs of life through to now cold water therapy. My concerns arise more on the health and safety. So two aspects. One is the health and safety aspects of things, and the other is, as a scientist, I want to know what mechanisms are operating. So from the health and safety side of things, what precautions are being put in place at an individual level for somebody to go and do this, because we've just, cold water immersion is a very significant stress for what is a tropical animal. And what responsibilities should have an organisation or a company have that are providing me with that opportunity? In fact, we're just about to publish a paper on exactly that topic, because that's kind of missing at the moment. And there's lots of people putting themselves probably at more risk than they need to, or they should, because of a lack of clarity in terms of the risks and how to mitigate them.
We're talking about training people about how to eat and how to dress, how to move intelligently in uncomfortably cold environments, but also what to avoid, because it's likely to kill you. So the obvious stuff. But more. That allowing your body to experience varying temperatures and sensations outside of a narrow, comfortable band is conceivably likely to kick us out of the involuntary, sedentary laziness that our bodies have settled into in our climate-controlled boxes, giving our systems something of a reminder of their natural potential to help themselves in future.
As a group, humans have become, particularly in high-income countries, too sedentary. People in high-income countries spend 90% of their time indoors. About a third of the energy we consume is consumed in keeping indoor public environments comfortable. And we have lost that challenge to our homeostatic systems.
Saunas, hot tubs, various traditional Nordic bathing activities, swimming in ponds and lakes, they are part of culture, and they're generally speaking somewhere on the spectrum between harmless and perhaps of some benefit. If people want to make money out of all of this, let's allow the market to perform its role. If Wim Hof used his grand style of showmanship and publicity stunts to encourage people to, as Professor Tipton would say,
our bodies have all these mechanisms that are supposed to try and keep us as constant as possible. What we're not told as much is that you need to perturb those systems to keep them functional.
Perturbate the human animal instead of spending all their time and resources trying to make their immediate environment comfortable temperature-wise. You'd have a fan in me. But there's not been anywhere near this level of self-restraint.
You activate the adrenal axis to spike, and that resets the body to its natural depth, by which the physiology suddenly awakens in the depth and gets in the control of our will.
For the various showman brands trying to sneak an addictive lifestyle sales pitch along with convenient snippets of science, Enough is enough. You don't need overbearing regulation to stop charlatans from getting rich and famous through public naivety and flock culture. You merely need to challenge them. Strip away the vague and emotive language, the meaningless faux aspiration.
My mission
why
is
do you do it?
to show that everybody by their mind can reach more depth within themselves and prevent. We got healing power.
It's dangerous to carelessly mix together demonstrable fact with supposition and mysticism, to extrapolate from one data point and claim a constellation. You risk sullying real information in return for making a quick buck or being given a daft promotional nickname. Clarity is inconvenient for these people. Clear delineations include recognizing that a small tranche of people will have a genetic gift or choose to dedicate themselves to suppressing pain and discomfort. If the general public are going to emulate, revere, or enrich the showman, they need the full story. People worship all manner of insanity, and that's our prerogative. It's not just him. The entertainment, extreme sports, and pop science world is awash with half-truth, omission, and nonsense. But Wim Hof's excruciating spike in UK television exposure needs pushback. Is he a fraud? Not entirely, because verified observations aren't cancelled out by any subsequent overreach. Can Wim Hof withstand cold immersion for longer than a random person? Yes. Were his world records or other stunts outright fakes? Not as far as I can ascertain. Is he physiologically something of an outlier? Probably. Are some of the revolutionary proclamations deftly curated leaps in logic? Yes. Has Wim Hof had his eye as much on the celebrity legend creation as on sober authenticity? I think so. Are his theories, training methods, and publicity stunts understood well enough to evangelize to the wider masses? I can't see how. Are some dangerous? Yes. Despite tired-sounding disclaimers that appear to undermine the entire premise, people have passed out and drowned whilst apparently following the method. Are unproven connections between his methods and healing desperately unwell people unethical and offering false hope? Surely.
I want it to be evidence-based in science. And I don't want to give any false hope to any person in this world.
We can really feel this inner power, healing power, and prevent from disease.
Does the method conflate hard-to-measure pain tolerance with objectively boosted physiology? Certainly. And those categories matter.
That we knock on your heaven's door inside, and that you are the master of your own brain. You are the owner of your own brain. Got that? Your own mind. Your own happiness, strength, and health is yours.
You can decide whether the careful weaving together of borrowed mysticism, patchy science, a cult of personality with sensationalist publicity stunts, and a profitable branded concept is something to be celebrated or castigated. Wim Hof corrodes any scientific credibility when he sells himself and his idea on little more than overreaching from highly atypical performance data, limited safety infrastructure, and hinting at healing a dizzying array of serious illnesses like MS and Parkinson's, yet stopping just short of incurring legal liability should act as a warning.
Having all kinds of diseases like Crohn, Roma, MS, cancer, asthma, coronary disease, bypasses and all that.
The intriguing potential of perturbating humans with uncomfortable temperature is in Hof's hands, being supplanted by an expensive pseudo-medical holiday camp and commercial enterprise based on rehashed Eastern mysticism and scientific overstep. With every step, the more believable contributions are undermined. It's dangerous to present a therapy like this as a fait accompli, whilst the prophet themselves, and so their audience, neglects that the anecdote or theory is merely a first step, not a basis around which thousands of people should start organising their lives and entrusting their health. To not make this clear is unforgivable. Wim Hof has not earned the right to be the first lifestyle guru whose product is comprehensively vindicated by science.
I am the first one to bring it to science and to take away the speculation around it.
There's a bonus that follows where I asked Professor Tipton to take us through the stages your body goes through when quickly immersed in cold water. Instead of snappy sound bites and edits, it deserves to be played out in full.
If somebody falls into cold water, the easiest way of describing that is in terms of the sequence of tissues that are affected. So initially what you get is sudden fall in skin temperature. Your peripheral cold receptors are about 0.18 millimeters below the surface of the skin. You've got 4 times more cold receptors than warm receptors, and they send an enormous amount of afferent information into the central nervous system. Now, cold water, because of the difference in the physical characteristics of cold water and cold air, the response you see with that sudden fall in skin temperature, you don't see in air because you just simply can't cool the skin quick enough. But water is very good at taking heat from the body because of its thermal conductivity and specific heat. As a consequence of which, you see a sudden fall in skin temperature, which drives what we called in the late 80s cold shock. Shock not being related to the medical condition, but just as a shocking experience. And that evokes a sympathetic response, a fight or flight response, which is a gasp, uncontrollable hyperventilation, peripheral vasoconstriction, increase in cardiac output, and as a consequence of which an increase in blood pressure. That's the kind of response that would be beneficial if you were on land and you were about to run away or about to engage in a fight with a predator, for example. It's completely inappropriate in water because the gas, for example, is 2 to 3 litres. The lethal dose of salt water into the lung is about 1.5 litres. So even in your first breath in, if you happen to have a wave break over your face or you happen to be submerged because you've fallen from a height or you're in a capsized vessel, you've got the chance of crossing that lethal dose. So that's the cold shock response. It peaks in the first 10 to 30 seconds of immersion, and as the skin receptors adapt to their new temperature, i.e. you lose the dynamic response, things go back towards normal. Which is why we then use that knowledge to underpin advice like if you fall into cold water, do as little as possible till you get your breathing back under control, which is the RNLI's Respect the Water, Float to Survive campaign, all based on that research done here. So the next tissues to cool then are the superficial nerves and muscles. And these are particularly found in the limbs, particularly the arms, where you've got very superficially running nerves and very superficial muscles, and that's where you become physically incapacitated. So in as little as 10 minutes, you'll get the muscle temperature down to around about the 27 degrees Celsius temperature that muscles become dysfunctional at. And that's where you'll see physical incapacitation equivalent to paralysis. Varies obviously with water temperature because it's now a temperature gradient you're looking at. Your next tissues to cool are the deep tissues of the body, and now you're looking at the traditional signs and symptoms of hypothermia. That's not going to happen before 30 minutes of immersion in even the coldest water. In an adult, we're simply just too big and too much thermal inertia. So to put that in context, about 60% of people in the UK who die falling into cold water die from those short-term responses. About 20% die from hypothermia, falling core temperature, and then about 20% die at the time of rescue, just before, during, or shortly after rescue, circumrescue collapse we've called it. So that's the rough spread of the risks.